And welcome to Around the Ozark Spotlight. Each week we uncover the stories behind the people who live and work here in Southwest Missouri. Those individuals with entrepreneurial spirit who work to better the lives of others or put pen to paper to write books about their stories and the history of the Ozarks and its people. I'm Scott Meier. Today we're exploring the world of personal finance. And with me is certified professional planner Kenny Gott. Kenny with John Piatchek and Associates. Kenny, what's your official title there? And
I'm
welcome,
president.
You're president. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. That's, I knew you were a shooter there. I didn't realize you were that big a shooter. So
Mr.
that's a
Big
good
Stuff,
thing.
you know.
Mr. Big Stuff. Now, for those of you that have never seen Kenny before or heard our conversations, I've had a privilege of knowing Ken now for about, 8 or 9 years. One of the first people I met when I came. Yeah. Well, thank you. One of the first people I met when I came to town. And was intrigued by his mentor, John Piatchek, who started the organization and brought Ken in. Ken, how many years ago did you come into the organization?
Ooh, that was back in 2009. So coming up on 16 years.
It's crazy how time flies, but love to help people. Now you've got some folks under your wing that you're bringing along too.
Right.
But one of the reasons I love having you on is Ken introduced me to something many years ago that I wish my wife and I had actually jumped into the first time we talked about it. But as we go into today's program on Spotlight, we're going to talk a little bit about not only financial planning for you as you try to get ready for retirement, but for some of you that are already in retirement. I think we want to talk about some of that too, about things you might want to consider and things you have or haven't done. And to give you a little background on Ken's background, he is an author, and he wrote this book many years ago called Bottom Line. And it's basically
we updated each year.
Well, don't take this wrong, but if you remember the Seinfeld episode where George had the bathroom book and he tried to return it to the library, they wouldn't take it. This has become, at least for my wife and I, our bathroom book. We do keep it in an area that we can refer to it often.
Yeah, I'll think that's a compliment, I guess.
It's a compliment.
You mean
think about the books you have in your own. Think about the books you have in your own bathroom, and I hope you have yours. You should, because it's a good reflection on what to do in a financial market that is never the same. Is that fair?
Yeah, the market
changes all the time.
Markets change all the time. Financial planning changes all the time, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to talk about. Initially, and Ken, you've been in financial planning really since 2009, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And before that, you were a musician. Why don't you tell the folks about that? They might remember you.
Wow. Yeah. No, I was a guitar player in a couple of bands, played bass in a couple of bands in the 80s, early to mid 80s, and late 80s, I guess. A band called Mr. Scary. I was in a,
Who comes up with these names?
Not me in that case, but yeah, just had some fun. Played cover tunes, wrote a few songs, had a lot of fun. Did some travel for a couple of years there in the early 80s, kind of around the country, and had the time of my life. Made no money whatsoever, in a big International Harvester bus with a bunch of.
They made buses. I didn't even know International Harvester.
Well, it was a 1964, and this was 1984.
Okay.
It was an expensive hobby in a way, and the problem was we were traveling. I mean, we went to South Dakota for a gig, and from there to Savannah, Georgia, a 48-hour drive in this bus because you could only go 40 miles an hour up a hill.
Sure.
And then a week in Savannah, Georgia. 3 weeks in Maine, and then to Biloxi, Mississippi, to an Air Force base we played at. They loved us, but with all that gas and bus repairs, equipment repairs,
food,
we had nothing but fun.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
It was a blast.
Well, the reason I bring it up, the reason I bring it up is because I had a treat. You showed me a YouTube video where you guys were performing, and actually very good. I laugh, but you're quite a good performer. Typically, you don't see people come out of the artistic community and going to the financial world. This was a big step for you.
Well, I wasn't a professional musician for any
You
period of
sound like
time.
it. You
Well, I
sound
mean,
like it.
you have to actually make a profit to be considered a professional, I think. But that was a pretty discrete period of my life, and I've revisited that off and on. I mean, I did have a band in 2013 for a little while, and then we were doing original music. But my most recent career was in human resources, believe it or not,
Okay.
which is also a leap from the music industry. I agree, but you got to understand. I went from a professional musician to telemarketer because that's the natural career progression of a bar band cover band guitar
Okay.
player.
Sure.
And so the human resources background sort of got me into a little more into investing than I already was. I was always interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I had to do orientation for telemarketers. Um, by the dozens. And so I was able to help them get enrolled in their 401k plan. I couldn't give them financial advice, and I told them
Mm-hmm.
that, but I said the one piece of advice I will give you, don't put all your eggs in one basket. At that time, they allowed employees to purchase stocks in the company we were employed by.
Sure.
Now that's very limited these days, but back then there were managers running around
Right.
who had all of their 401k in this one particular company. Maybe I shouldn't. I guess I can name it because it's MCI. It doesn't exist anymore, so they can't
Right.
sue me. And I'm not going to say anything untrue. It's Bernie Ebbers bought MCI, turned it into WorldCom, and then ran it into the side of a hill.
Right.
Went bankrupt. So these managers were running around saying, when the stock was at I think 85, and he says it's going to 120. Buy more. Buy now. And I was
Mm-hmm.
going around behind this manager saying, yeah, take that with a grain of salt. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, So
Right.
I was aware of that concept, and that turned out to be prescient, I guess, or correct in that case. And so I kind of came by this in an organic way. My interest in investing, it was kind of a natural career progression to
Mm-hmm.
get more into that side of things. And especially because I had a family member, a father-in-law, who was John Piatchek, and he needed some help. I was available at the time between, it was actually the 2008 recession made me available, if you want to put it that way, to
Sure.
John to do some work. Working with a father-in-law, you never know going in how that's going to go. And of course, any boss, you're going to have, rough patches here and there. But honestly, John Piatchek is a sweetheart. Easy to work with, and really taught me most of what I know. And then I kind of took the ball and ran with it from there in the 2010s.
My guest today on Around the Ozark Spotlight is Kenny Gott. Kenny, a certified financial planner with Piatchek and Associates. Kenny, let's simplify it as much as we can for young people that might be listening to the show this morning. When you're working in a company, you're not making a lot of money. You were talking about a 401k. What's
Right.
the benefit to someone who says, I'm 25 years old and, I'm not going to be an old guy for another 40 years or whatever. Why do I need to start saving any money? What's in it for me in the long run, even in the short term, but what's in it for me?
Well, that's a common sentiment at that age. I think it's when people start thinking about settling down and starting a family. That is a wake-up call. And then they start suddenly paying attention to all this advice out in the media about saving for retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're not starting a family yet, I mean, my daughter is 19. And so I've kind of ingrained in her the idea that if you just save 10% of your pay at any job you have. And I mean, this was when she was 16. She was working, I mean, we're talking about 10 hours a week, 10 or 15
Sure.
hours a week. So not much money coming in. So 10% of very little is tiny. But
Mm-hmm.
I explained to her the fact that if you do that 10% religiously early in your career, in your adult life, you will pile up enormous mountains of cash, and you'll have a very enjoyable retirement, be able to do what you want to do, and have the
Mm-hmm.
financial freedom to not worry about that side of your life. You can focus on family and enjoying your life. So she took that to heart, and she's been doing that. So now she's 19 and she's got a few $1,000s.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can have a few $1,000s at age 19 or 25 and do that process of just regular savings, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
concept called dollar cost averaging, where the ups and downs of the stock market actually benefit you. You pay less when markets are down per share,
Sure.
and you buy less of it when markets are at a high. So it sort of mathematically gains you a little bit by investing on a per paycheck basis rather than, once a year or when you have a windfall. And it gets you the discipline. And that's really the key. If somebody changes jobs and they have to enroll in a new 401k plan,
Mm-hmm.
it often takes them a while to get around to it. It's not a top priority for a lot of people, and that's normal. So just getting in and continuing to make those contributions and just making it a priority. Just get it in place, and it's automatic. It comes out of your paycheck
Mm-hmm.
before you're taxed, so you're saving more that way. You're avoiding some tax on your paycheck. Now you're going to pay tax on that money when you withdraw it in retirement in 40 or 50 years.
Right. Sure.
But you'll probably be in a lower tax bracket then than you will be maybe than you were in the middle of your career or later in your career. Now, if you're really young, it may make sense to, if you have an option of putting in a Roth 401k or a Roth
Mm-hmm.
IRA, that means it's after you're taxed, you put money in. If you're in a lower tax bracket now than you are going to be in retirement, then that might make sense. And that's often the case for people who are making minimum wage or early in their career at a low
Sure.
pay rate.
But you really got to leave it alone, right? When you say you've got to
Yeah.
you've got to use some sense here. The sense is you put it in and you leave it alone. You don't
Well,
use that money
right.
to buy a car or buy something that
No,
you feel like is something you want. It's not a need necessarily.
no,
Isn't
it's
that the
not a
point?
slush. It's not a slush fund, and
Right.
and the danger is you try to be too aggressive with your saving, and you put more in each paycheck than your budget really allows for, and then suddenly you need a car repair, or you see a shiny object you want, and it's
Mm-hmm.
tempting to, or maybe you have no other resource and you have to borrow from your 401k, or worse, just withdraw it or stop contributing to your 401k. Terrible. It's better to start with a low percentage. Start with 1% of your paycheck if that's the best you can do. Make sure you can handle your budget, and
Yeah.
you won't miss 1% of your pay. I almost guarantee you. And then when you get a raise, go ahead and enjoy part of that raise for your cash flow. And if you can, though, add another percent to that 1%. Now it's 2% you're saving. Build it up till you get to 5%,
Mm-hmm.
8%. And when you get somewhere between 5 and 10%, you don't have to keep going. Now, some people have to because they wait until they're 40, 50 years old. Then you have to start putting in, 15% of your paycheck. Or, I mean, we run into this in our practice with clients who come in, new folks. We do an analysis. They've never had it done. We
Mm-hmm.
analyze their long-term trajectory. It turns out they really have to kind of crunch down and save pretty hard for the next 10, 15 years to be able to retire when they want, or they may end up having to work longer than they planned because
Sure.
they didn't start saving soon enough. And when folks come in, they kind of know that. So that's why getting started early is key. Don't save more than your budget will allow, and don't try to time the markets. If you're only going to remember one thing from what we talk about all day, it's
Mm-hmm.
market timing does not work. And you don't need to do that. You don't need to know when the market's going to drop and get out, and know when the market's going to go up and get back in. The markets are up 75% of the time. So get in, stay in. You can't predict that 25% that it's going to drop. It's going to happen. It's going to be 1 day out of 4, 1 month out of 4, 1 year out of 4.
Sure.
Markets will be down. It's not fun. You watch your account value drop. Some people may be tempted to get out. Don't do it. Markets always recover, always. So just
And
leave
the
it
adage
alone.
is
It'll recover.
right. And the adage is buy low, sell high. Don't be selling low because it's really tough to get that money back.
Don't
Going back to
get out. Don't if the
yeah.
stocks are at an all-time high, some people say, "Oh, well, I better get out because, there's nowhere to go but down." No. The stock market hits an all-time high typically several times each year because
Mm-hmm.
markets go up. Now, when there's a recession, There's a little bit of a reset, but it's not even a reset to a lower point. When the markets drop, they drop, and they can be pretty dramatic. Like 2008, it was a 40% drop, and it took 5.4 years to recover for the buying value of those stocks to hit bottom, come all the way back to what they were worth before. And that's a pretty long slog. But once it recovers, it's as if it didn't even happen. The markets average 10% or so over the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that just seems to be the magic sweet spot that capitalism creates. And this has been the case for 150 years since they've been keeping records. So to average 10%, the markets have to make up for those 40% downturns like 2008 and the other smaller ones. Like in 2020, there was a 30% downturn from the pandemic. And that took a whopping, 3 or 4 months to fully recover. And it's like it never happened. You can lay a board across that, stock chart, and you see the dip there. But it's not just that it dipped and then you started with a new starting point and then eventually you get back. No, it's a dip, and then the recovery gets it back within an average of 3.3 years back to full buying purchase power again. And so it's emotionally upsetting when your account value drops. No question about it. I feel the same way. I talk about this all the time, and yet I feel that pain too, for myself and my own money. So, and vicariously for my clients. But you've got to just understand markets always recover. You don't know how the recovery is going to play out or how long it's going to take.
Well, hold that thought, because we're going to be back in just a minute, here on Around the Ozarks Spotlight. I'm your host, Scott Meier. Back in just a minute.
Hey, everybody, it's Ethan and Sarah Forhetz from your favorite podcast, Around the Ozarks in 5. I'm sure you've been wondering, how can I get even more amazing stories, events, and witty banter to start my day?
Well, look no further. Here we are. Sign up for our daily newsletter. You'll have what's going on around the Ozarks right at your fingertips each weekday morning.
Yeah, just go to aroundtheozarks.com, click on the newsletter tab to sign up.
Thanks for listening to Around the Ozarks in 5. We hope to see you in your inbox soon.
Welcome back to the second half of today's Around the Ozarks Spotlight. I'm Scott Meier, your host, and with me is Kenny Gott. Kenny, a certified financial planner with John Piatchek and Associates. And Ken and I were talking about what should you do if you're 25 in this next half segment, which is going fast. We'll talk about what you should do if you're just about to retire, want to retire, or are in retirement. Mm-hmm. Ken, one of the things, I retired from my full-time work here a couple of years ago. And when I did...
Congratulations again.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And when I did, I had a look at histories on things, because all these conversations you have about retirement have to do with what kind of income do you want to pay yourself, because that's basically what you're doing when you're in retirement. And something that I hadn't given a lot of thought to until I was getting ready to retire is the cost of money, or to put it better, the inflation effect on money and the value of money.
Right.
Everybody talks about the hidden tax. Well, inflation's an incredible hidden tax. About every 20 years, the price of the value of a dollar is almost cut in half every 20 years. So when you think about that, and you and I are both old enough to remember, you could buy a new car in 1972. You could buy a nice Ford sedan or Chevy or what have you for about $2,800.
Yeah, Grandma always talks about that nickel.
Right, and they were fully loaded. Mm-hmm. And today, that same car, fully loaded, you're talking about something that might run you $40,000 or $50,000. So think about that. And from that's 50 years. It's not that long, really, especially as you grow older. So in knowing that and doing the math yourself, what do you tell folks when they come in and sit down with you, and they're 5 years from what they think is a retirement age, and you're seeing they've got less than $150,000 in savings? I mean, what goes through your mind? What do you tell them?
Well, the inflation question is the hardest thing for a do-it-yourself planner, and most of us are do-it-yourself planners most of our lives until we cry uncle and go see somebody like me, to get some real advice and some real planning. And the software we use for these retirement analysis it accounts for, inflation rate of, and we use a little bit higher than the target 2%. We use 2.5, put a little cushion in there, be a little conservative. We use a higher rate of inflation on healthcare because it has historically been a higher rate. College similarly. So that planning is difficult, certainly with a pencil and paper and a calculator, because you got to account for different rates of inflation on all those things. So at some point, now there are better tools online now than there were a few years ago. You can find, and in fact, if somebody gives me a call, I can direct them to a pretty good one that does account for inflation and cash flows in and out. If you have real estate you may sell down the road, for example. But, we just try to find somebody who doesn't look like they have enough. We have to analyze it because sometimes that's not the case. They're fine because maybe their spending level is really modest. So it really is that battle between how much do you spend and how much do you have to spend. So you got to, analyze it and then see if there's a gap. And if, what we always start with is, well, how do you want your retirement to look? How much travel do you want to do? What kind of car do you want to buy and how often? We plug all that in. And if it works, sometimes to the client's surprise, then you're fine.
Sure.
Then it's just a matter of managing taxes on your investments, which we help with, and those distributions, we set those up. We help with all that kind of day-to-day planning as time goes on. But if a person does show some gaps down the road, we have to look at, really, there aren't that many levers, frankly, to pull in the financial planning world, which is you can, spend less, you can earn more if you're still working, or get more growth on your investments if you're in retirement. And that is kind of it. You got to, so you either have to cut back your lifestyle a little bit in some cases, and, we can pull some realistic levers and sometimes fix these things, because if a person is saying, okay, I want to spend, in my household, $10,000 a year for travel. Well, when someone retires at say 60 or 65, you got a 15-year window or so where you're going to be healthy and have your wits about you for the most part.
For the most part,
most days, right. And you can really enjoy it. So you kind of whip out that bucket list and start doing those travel plans and knock those destinations off, and then you'll probably discover a couple of places you might want to go back to, maybe less frequently, but certainly after age 80, 85, people are going to travel less. So we will first we'll knock off a certain percentage of that travel budget after age 85. We will try to say, okay, you want to buy a car every 5 years and spend $50,000 a pop. Could you get by every 7 years and maybe 35, 40,000 after trade-in? You can get a good car. So there are these, the big discretionary items are where you have a little bit of, leeway to adjust the plan, and even in a realistic way, maybe fill that gap. So sometimes the decisions get a little harder and a little harder. The basic spending is the basic spending, but people can dig into their budget in real detail and find subscriptions that they don't need.
Sure.
Maybe they have a gifting strategy that's excessive. We had a client with a daughter out in LA trying to make it in the showbiz, and they were paying for her apartment. I think she worked part-time, but it was a chunk of change every month. And they came in, they were long-term clients too. And they said, can you do an analysis and show us that, that this won't work over the long run, so we can show her. And I said, well, heck, if you want, we can get on, I'll break the bad news to her if you want and get on a call with her. But we did the analysis. They were correct. Most people kind of know where they are on their finances. They were right. It really wouldn't work to do that over the long run. So I
would think you see that a lot. They talk about it all the time, that parents, and you're a parent, I'm a parent, you always want to do right by your children.
Sure.
But if you're really seriously considering wanting to be able to retire and live a lifestyle, and what's interesting, you were talking about going online and looking at the different things that you can do online where you can plug in money and the different tools. And we all want to think, yeah, I could probably live on 70% or 80% of what I'm making
Yeah.
when I'm working. But I'll tell you what, in reality, that's really not life. I mean,
No.
life is when you're living life, that's how you live. And as someone who, we stepped into that a couple of years ago with my own partial retirement. If anything, we probably spend a little bit more than we were spending when
That's
I was
common.
working, because we're traveling more, we're doing things. I've got a gift budget, and I know you guys have seen. I sat down because I'm a little anal this way, but way before we decided that we were going to pull the plug on working, uh, built spreadsheets about all of our costs,
Mhm.
everything that I could put together on
Yeah,
costs,
I
and then
remember those
project
spreadsheets.
and project costs, like how much for the grandkids for Christmas and birthdays and Valentine's. You don't realize when you're working how many holidays there are, and by golly, Kenny, there are hundreds of them.
Yes,
And if you're
indeed.
married to a spouse
You
like
count
mine, believe me,
birthdays.
we celebrate all of them, and we celebrate by sending things. So it's that budget wasn't necessarily exactly where it needed to be. So I think that's been a real eye opener. And I would guess, again, when people come to you and they say, "What do you think?" What you probably think is, "I got to be as honest with these folks as I can be."
Totally. Oh, yeah, absolutely. People want to know where they stand, and for better or worse. And, I'd say 75% of the time it's better than they thought.
Okay.
They're going to be okay. They haven't taken into account that, Medicare supplements and Medicare, it's a lot less expensive than, healthcare out on the open market. But you're right. This old rule of thumb that you'll need 80% in retirement of what you brought in during your working years, I think it probably works for a lot of people, but I would say most of our clients, you're right.
Hmm.
You spend more in the early years than you did before, especially the travel is the big wild card. So if you're going to do more travel early in retirement than you did before retirement, your budget may very well go up because that
Sure.
closed savings from the job, and maybe eating lunch out less. I mean, a lot of people find themselves eating out more,
Hmm.
in retirement than before. So that's you got to use your actual budget, and whatever you're doing now in your life, you're probably going to enjoy doing that in retirement and maybe more of it. So you sort of got to
Sure.
make a guess at that. But the spreadsheet method is it's not useless by any means, but it's a little tricky because people try to list everything they spend money on in
Hmm.
detail. I mean, line by line, item by item.
Yep.
You do that, and most of the time, it's not really that close to what you actually spend. There's so many little ways that cash trickles out of your budget that you
Hmm.
don't think about. Parking expenses and lunch through the drive-through, and the kid needs $100. A thousand things that add
Yeah.
up through the course of a year. That there's so the spreadsheet item list is useful because you can spot things that you can cut, things you're overspending on. But in the end, you got to double check that against your actual cash flow versus, that's what I'm saying is, what do you have coming in during the month? How much, cash flow do you have? How
Right.
much do you have at the end of the month? That's your actual spending. And
Hmm.
if you can find where all that money went, that's great, but it's hard to do. So you use both methods. Do a
Now,
gut check.
in the last minute we have, Ken, sorry to jump in
Sure.
there, but I
No,
want
no.
to get this in before we run out of time. One of the things that you helped Brenda and I with was, it's not about just putting money in the market to have it grow. It's got to grow. Your money's got to work when you're in retirement. Trust me, that's a big part
Yeah,
of it.
when you retire, you don't pull your money out of the market. You let it keep
No,
growing.
right. But you also want to be able to sleep at night. And one of the things that you steered us towards was an annuity, because for all all the jobs that I've had, at no time did I ever have the ability to get money from a company over time. No pension. There was no pension.
Right.
And you were able to steer us towards an annuity. And annuities have changed a lot. And I know that's an entire program. And maybe I'll have you come back and we can talk about just that. But quickly, can you sum up why you think some people should be in some annuities as well?
Well, you kind of put your finger on it. Most people these days don't have a pension. And an annuity that has an income guarantee is like kind of setting up your own little pension plan. So you put
Hmm.
money in. If you defer the income, if you wait a while before you start taking the income, they give you these automatic increases via a formula. And there are various flavors. Some are in the stock market. The ones that are really popular these days, the indexed annuities, are not in the stock market, but the growth is based on the S&P 500 or some other market index. So they use that as a yardstick to give you some growth. Now it's going to be less growth than the stock market. It's limited, better than the bank. But the income guarantee, what you're talking about, is it's a separate formula, kind of a side formula. So when you turn on that rider, they just kick out every month or on an annual basis, whatever you want, a guaranteed amount for life. So that's a base amount you can depend on. And for a lot of people, that just kind of takes a lot of worry off the table about cash flow. They're going to get their Social Security, and they're going to get cost of living increases on that. If they have an annuity, they can kind of supplement their income with that. And right now, in particular, interest rates being as high as they are, that's kind of how these things are set up. And the higher the interest rate in the overall market, the better you're going to do. So right now is a particularly good time for income riders, with the interest rates being really through the roof right now.
Well, Kenny, I'd love to have you back on another program. We can go much deeper in depth on that. I want to thank you. Well, absolutely. And I want to thank you today for joining us on Around the Ozark Spotlight. Also, I want to thank my producers, Taylor Worley and Jay Stevens, and all of you for joining us today. If you happen to miss all or part of today's conversation, you can find ATO Spotlight on AroundTheOzarks.com or the ATO app found in either the Apple App Store or Android apps. There you'll find today's program as well as all of this year's and past year's shows. Also look for us on YouTube as early as next week. I'm Scott Meier, and remember, every day is a gift. The best present you can ever receive. Have a great day.